There are many great filmmakers out there spinning their great stories, but in my opinion there are only but a handful of great filmmakers that have a style that is so unique and so distinctive that it is immediately recognizable, even if you don't officially know that you're watching one of their movies. Of course, I'm talking about people like Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher, Martin Scorsese, and Tim Burton, to name but a few. And of course, this man. And if I do say his name wrong in this episode, I'll probably continue to do so. I apologize sincerely. But this man is a visionary of the filmmaking medium. And of course, he has garnered a legion of loyal fans. Yes, that's right, I'm talking about Guillermo del Toro. So in today's episode, I'm going to take a look at 10 horror movies that del Toro often cites as being some of his favorites, as well as inspirations behind his own work. Now, a moment ago I mentioned Tim Burton, and I did that on purpose because I've always felt that Tim Burton and Guillermo del Toro are very similar, at least stylistically. It's kind of like both make these movies that feel like dark urban fantasies. They both make use of these nightmarish, cartoonish visuals that often take inspiration from Gothic Expressionism. And both filmmakers make these films that, at least to me, have this kind of macabre yet twisted and at the same time innocent sort of tone. Now that Guillermo del Toro has made the critically acclaimed Cabinet of Curiosities for Netflix, I kind of wonder if Tim Burton is going to follow suit and make his own anthology of horror short stories. When my friend filmmaker Encia van Heerden suggested that I continue the series of top 10 favorite horror movies of famous filmmakers by diving into del Toro's work, I really jumped at the opportunity. And not just because I'm a big fan of his films CRONOS, HELLBOY, and the very Burton-esque Pan's Labyrinth, but also because I started to wonder if Tim Burton and Guillermo del Toro have such a similar aesthetic. I kind of wonder if they have the same cinematic influences. And come to think of it, I really wouldn't mind seeing a conversation about movies between those two guys. I really loved compiling this list for you guys today, as I do with all of these lists. I don't know, I kind of find that it sheds an interesting light on the filmmaker's work when I know what influenced them. But not just that, it also sheds an interesting light on the genre as a whole, and I really hope that it does the same thing for you guys. And just for your information, today's list is based off interviews that I saw and read where del Toro either directly cites some of these movies as being his favorite, or maybe speaks about them in a more indirect way, having impacted his life as well as his movies. And also, guys, please keep an open mind as to the level of horrorness of some of these films. What you can expect from this list is an eclectic mix of straight up, easy to define horror movies, as well as more subtle, avant-garde, not so easy to pigeonhole into the horror bracket. But all of these movies are interesting. So, without any further ado, let's jump straight into Guillermo del Toro's top 10 favorite horror movies of all time!
You have to fear the living more than the dead.
Now, although del Toro hasn't explicitly mentioned the first film on this list as being one of his favorites, he did say that it was one of the scariest films he's ever seen. It also apparently made him give up eating meat for a while. Well, according to del Toro, that is nothing but a rumor. Honestly though, I did find del Toro's love for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to be a little bit of a surprise. Why? Well, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's nihilistic tone and its ultra-violence almost seems worlds apart from del Toro's own heartfelt, intimate, dark fables. But like a lot of films on today's list, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a classic of the genre, and it did change the direction of horror. Now, in one of the interviews that I read, del Toro mentioned something very interesting. He says that he believes fairy tales can basically be divided into two categories: cautionary and anarchistic. Now, if you're looking for a fairy tale filled with anarchy, then there are none more anarchistic than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
But then I became a parent, and it became incredibly scary.
From one classic horror to another. For a man that makes such a distinctive brand of horror, del Toro has often mentioned that he doesn't actually see himself as a horror filmmaker. He claims to not be a fan of jump scares, but rather the atmosphere and the aesthetics that make up the genre of horror. At number 9, we have the film that scared del Toro more as an adult than as a child. Now, considering that Del Toro's own distinctive brand of horror is more about strong human emotions and atmosphere rather than, say, jump scares and gore, it is absolutely no surprise that The Exorcist is not only one of Del Toro's favorite horror movies, but favorite movies of all time.
I would say The Exorcist, but The Exorcist when I was a kid didn't do anything for me. But then I became a parent and it became incredibly scary.
I really started a kinship with monsters when I was in the crib.
Number 8 on this list is the first point where Burton's and Del Toro's influences cross paths. In 2013, Del Toro made the box office smash hit Pacific Rim, a sci-fi action movie about giant robots fighting off giant sea monsters. So yes, you guessed it, Del Toro loves Godzilla. And so does Tim Burton. I think it's so cool that Del Toro even admitted that his great hope with Pacific Rim was to reintroduce the kaijus to today's children. Now, when you consider all the recent remakes that we've seen of Godzilla, I think it's safe to say that Del Toro probably succeeded. So enamored was Del Toro with Godzilla that he even dedicated Pacific Rim in the film's end credits to creature feature legends Ray Harryhausen and Godzilla director Yoshiro Honda.
I love that creature, I love Godzilla. I wanted to see more and more. I'm always been a monster guy. And I really started a kinship with monsters when I was in the crib.
Number 7 on this list influenced John Carpenter's faceless Michael Myers in Halloween, and also Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In. But it also influenced Del Toro, who said that this film is fragile love clinging on for dear life in a storm of darkness. French horror film The Eyes Without a Face is, in Del Toro's own words, a gorgeous and dark poem about fragility and horror. And considering its strong character-driven narrative and also its nightmarish visuals, I feel that this film bears a very strong resemblance to a lot of Del Toro's own work.
And I really started a kinship with monsters when I was in the crib.
When considering the strange episodic tales of Del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, it is absolutely no wonder that the filmmaker loves the 1922 Swedish silent horror film Hexen, or Witches. Now, much like with Cabinet, it combines a series of short, disturbing tales spun together in the dark fantasy tone that Del Toro's work is also affectionately known for. Of Hexen, the filmmaker said that it is a strangely titillating record of sin and perversity that is as full with dread as it is of desire.
That amazing movie Hexen was doing it in a very different way, So
over the last few years, a lot of Universal Studio monster fans such as myself have been waiting for a remake of Jack Arnold's 1954 classic The Creature from the Black Lagoon. But the truth is, an admittedly big Universal horror movie fan may have already given us one. Of course, I'm talking about Guillermo del Toro. Del Toro once famously asked, why doesn't the monster ever get the girl? Well, in his masterpiece Shape of Water, Del Toro may just have given the famous gill man his wish after all.
To them. And that's what happened to me, and I really had this vision of Julie Adams swimming over the Gillman in Creature from the Black Lagoon, and I thought that's the most beautiful image I've ever seen.
Kate Bush wrote a song about this film. Ari Aster's Hereditary was inspired by this film, and Guillermo del Toro paid homage to this film with his 2015 gothic horror Crimson Peak. The Innocence is a psychological horror steeped in paranoia and dark atmosphere, much like Del Toro's own work, and it is no surprise that he cites The Innocence as one of his favorite horror movies of all time.
And some of the most poignant political films are in horror. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead.
Look at Shape of Water, look at Hellboy, look at CRONOS, look at Pan's Labyrinth. And you'll see that much like with Tim Burton, Del Toro is fascinated in a very specific type of horror monster, the sympathetic one. Which is why I was not surprised to see James Whale's absolute classic, The Bride of Frankenstein, and its brilliant predecessor, Frankenstein, being cited by Del Toro as being two of his favorite movies. Of Frankenstein, Del Toro said, "The movie touches the very essence of what I am and all that I believe in." Such is his affection for the film that Del Toro wanted to make his own Frankenstein once upon a time. However, the project ultimately fell through because of Universal's intention of making a shared universe.
These are true freaks. These are truly contesting films that are contesting the status quo.
Now, there are very few filmmakers, particularly those that roam the realm of horror, that haven't fallen in love with this grainy, black and white, charming, tragic tale of a vampire. Yes, I'm talking about Wilhelm Murnau's 1922 classic, Nosferatu. I've got a little admission to make that ever since I started this channel, I've seen this movie popping up all over the show. So I went and watched it for the first time about 4 or 5 months ago, and I've fallen absolutely in love with it. It has become one of my favorite movies of all time. Of Nosferatu, Del Toro once said, "It is a symphony of fear indeed, and a symphony of perfect visual storytelling. The hypnotic nature of the film engrosses the audience into a trance."
There's many melodramas and comedies that pass for good, and you're going to come out of this okay. So they don't have that caustic element that horror has in its nature.
Now, for the number one film on Guillermo del Toro's top 10 favorite horror movies of all time, at least according to this list, I'd like to introduce another silent classic to you. It is a film that Del Toro has probably spoken about more than any other film. And when you consider that it is very likely the spiritual cousin of Nosferatu, I can completely understand why Del Toro loves Carl Theodor Dreyer's 1932 underrated classic, Vampire, so much. Made about 10 years after Nosferatu, Del Toro went even as far as contrasting it with Murnau's classic by saying, "It's one of the two pillars for every vampiric film ever made." Whereas Dreyer concerns himself with the spiritual, Murnau's film has a tangible physical component of corruption that makes evil immediate and real.
But I think that, of course, you can. Dreyer was doing it with Vampire.
Yes.
And in a strange way.
So there you have it, guys, my list of Guillermo del Toro's top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. Now look, Guillermo del Toro has a list of favorite horror movies longer than my arm. I mean, he's mentioned Jaws, he's also mentioned Aliens and Freaks, all of those movies. Curse of the Werewolf, that's another one that was very interesting to me. A lot of movies that could have made a place on this list. But if there is a particular movie that you think should have made a place on this list, then let me know down in the comments, and if you've got the time, tell me why. For me, I think what I really liked about Guillermo del Toro's favorite horror movies, and not just the ones on this list, but in general, is that he has this appreciation for the classics from the golden age of horror. And why that speaks to me personally is because those are the movies, that's the era that got me into horror movies. I mean, I absolutely love the black and white Dracula and the Wolfman and the creature from the Black Lagoon. So, and all of those movies I'm going to tackle at some point. But if there is a movie that you would like me to watch and share my thoughts on, let me know. And if you would like me to check out a particularly famous filmmaker and their list of top 10 favorite horror movies, let me know. And I'll try and get to it as soon as possible. Remember, if you like this content, bite the subscribe, like, share, do all of those kinds of funky stuff. I really appreciate the back and forth too. Anyway, on that note, I wish you guys sincerely and genuinely all a wonderful week. Stay safe, stay happy, and most of all, stay horror.